Welcome to Combating Compassion Fatigue. This is a great course for those of you who are new to the concept of compassion fatigue or who just want a refresher. So let's start by talking about what exactly is compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue has been described by traumatologist Charles Figley as the cost of caring for either people or animals who are suffering or who have been traumatized, and it's the combined effects of secondary traumatic stress and burnout. It affects those in a variety of helping fields, including police officers, firefighters, nurses, therapists, and of course, animal welfare workers and activists. And if you think about it, long-term exposure to things like animal abuse and neglect, euthanasia, losing animals, pet overpopulation, these things can really start to take a heavy toll on us in all dimensions of our lives, emotionally, physically, socially, spiritually. So now let's look at some symptoms of compassion fatigue. One of the most common is just this overwhelming sense of sadness or depression. We might experience sleep problems. This might look like having nightmares, difficulty falling or staying asleep, oversleeping, not sleeping enough. It might look like low energy or fatigue throughout the day, anger or irritability. We may suffer from grief, especially if we lose a lot of our animals or we have to perform euthanasia. Sometimes we might experience social isolation, especially because a lot of people outside of the animal welfare and rights communities don't really understand the stress and trauma that's involved in this work. We might have appetite changes, such as eating too much, eating too little, binge eating, things like that. Sometimes we lose interest in activities that once brought us pleasure. We might start to experience relationship conflicts, and this can be conflicts within our intimate relationships, our friends and family, our coworkers. It could look like conflicts between staff and volunteers or staff and management. We might start to experience hypervigilance, which is really this feeling of constantly being on edge, constantly waiting for something bad to happen. You know, in this line of work, we try to save every animal every time, but we can't, and this can oftentimes lead to feelings of guilt. A severe symptom of compassion fatigue is just feeling numb, feeling empty inside, feeling almost like a zombie. We might start to experience work problems. This might look like taking more sick days than normal, coming in late, cutting corners at work. It might even look like the opposite. You know, sometimes people are so afraid to experience the negative emotions that come with this work that they start to overwork. They become workaholics and they just throw themselves into work to avoid feeling those negative emotions. Sometimes compassion fatigue can manifest itself as anxiety, and physical anxiety might look like rapid, shallow breathing, racing heart, tense muscles. Mental anxiety might look like racing thoughts, constant worry, afraid that something bad is going to happen to you or others. Just like feelings of guilt, sometimes when we can't save all the animals that we try to, it can sometimes lead to low self-esteem. A lot of people in the caring professions, including animal welfare and animal rights, we almost derive our self-worth through the work that we do with animals. And unfortunately, it can sometimes impact our self-esteem in a negative way. We may sometimes suffer with bodily complaints, and this might look like headaches or stomach aches. We may struggle with traumatic, intrusive thoughts. We may start to feel hopeless. We might even lose our sense of humor. Some people start to develop unhealthy coping skills, and this can look like drug or alcohol abuse. It can look like addiction. And when I talk about addiction, I'm not just talking about drugs or alcohol. This could be a shopping addiction, gambling, social media, an eating type addiction. Another symptom of compassion fatigue might be poor concentration, difficulty focusing or making decisions. And finally, a very severe symptom of compassion fatigue is suicidal thoughts or attempts. And this is a sign that you need to take immediate action. If there's one thing that you take away from this course, I want you to remember that compassion fatigue is extremely common. Again, it affects a variety of helping professionals. It's not a weakness, it's not a character flaw, and it's not a mental disorder. Now, we will be talking about mental disorders in upcoming courses, such as anxiety, depressive, and trauma disorders. But again, compassion fatigue is really just a set of symptoms. And it's important to realize that, again, Charles Figley called this the cost of caring. It's really just a consequence of caring. The good news is there are a lot of steps that we can take to minimize the effects of compassion fatigue, and we'll learn about some of those coming up later in this course as well as upcoming courses. All right, now I recommend that you pause this course and download the Professional Quality of Life Scale. The Professional Quality of Life Scale measures both the negative and positive effects of helping those who experience suffering or trauma. It measures the two components of compassion fatigue, burnout and secondary traumatic stress, as well as compassion satisfaction, which is essentially the opposite of compassion fatigue. It's the joy that we derive from our work. And of course, we'll talk a lot more about these concepts in upcoming courses. Now, one thing to keep in mind that although the scale was originally designed for those helping suffering or traumatized people, you can easily just substitute person or people for animal or animals. So for example, question number 2 states, I am preoccupied with more than one person that I help. You would just read it to say, I am preoccupied with more than one animal I help. Now, because compassion fatigue tends to ebb and flow in terms of severity, it's a good idea to take this test now and at different times throughout your career.